The Grenlec Debates, powering bright ideas.
You're watching the 11th season of the Grenlec Debates. Please bear in mind that matches, topics, and positions are randomly selected by schools. The theme for the round of 16 is Grenadian and Caribbean history. I am your chairperson, Rohan Bernard, and I call this house to order. And the motion is, be it resolved that the former colonial powers pay reparations to their former slave colonies. The proposition, J.W. Fletcher Catholic Secondary. The opposition, the Anglican High. Please welcome the first speaker for the proposition.
A pleasant afternoon to all. My team and I stand firm in support of this captivating moot. Be it resolved that former colonial powers pay reparation to former slave colonies. The Macmillan Online Dictionary defines reparation as something good that you do to help improve a bad situation that you created. Colonialism is defined by Kwame Kumar, and I quote, the policy by which the mother country, the colonial power, binds her colonies to find by political ties with the primary objectives of promoting her own economic advantage. End of quote. Barrow, Giles, 2002. Honorable Chair, my team and I have developed our arguments around these factors. 1. True development of the colonial rulers was at the detriment of their slave colonies. 2. The advantages for the former colonial powers and the disadvantages to the slave colonies are still seen today. 3. Steps towards reparation have been started. 4. Laws were created to ensure the oppression of the black colonies. WorldWeekly.com states, and I quote, throughout the colonial era, Europe's share of the world's GDP jumped from 20% to 60%. End of quote. How do you think this happened? Through the maltreatment of our hard-working ancestors. Anthropologist Jason Hickley notes in The Guardian that, and I quote, India commanded 27% of the world's economy prior to British colonization. When the colonialists left in 1947, it only represented 3%. Statistics continue to show that colonized places suffered and continue to suffer years after. End of quote. Clearly, Britain took over. According to Beckles, 2013, and I quote, the British received credit as the creators and primary beneficiaries of chattel slavery. The Caribbean were the place where fortunes were made within this system without an interest in human compassion. Caribbean governments that emerged from slavery and colonialism have inherited the massive crisis of community poverty and institutional unpreparedness for development. These governments still daily engage in the business of cleaning up the colonial mess in order to prepare for development. CaribbeanReparation.com. The colonization by Europe has a quite major part to play in the underdeveloped, staggered, and dependent colonies in recent times. According to James Walvin, professor of history at York University, and I quote, after abusing the virgin soil and having our forefathers toil the soil while Christianizing them, we are now underdeveloped in many ways. Our resources have been exported and sold back to us. End of quote. Honorable Chair, after colonization in 1948, Caribbean people were invited to Britain to work. They boarded the Empire Windrush ship and sailed there with hope. Sadly, BBC.co.uk states, and I quote, many of them experienced racism and discrimination and often found it hard to get a proper time to make friends with British people to get jobs. Later, many of their children were bullied at school because of the color of their skins. End of quote. Opponents, if our ancestors were alive today, they would be able to attest that old pirates, yes, they robbed I, sold I to the merchant ships. Bob Marley. It is time we stop let persons control our into making us believe that we were not wronged and that we should move on. Former colonial powers should pay reparation to former slave colonies. I thank you.
The first speaker for the opposition.
Esteemed judges, opponents all, good afternoon. We fully oppose the moot, be it resolved, that the former colonial powers pay reparations to their former slave colonies. I will discuss the tremendous impracticalities associated with the payment of reparations. My colleague will discuss the grave repercussions of same. Cross and rebuttal speakers will follow. We propose our own definition for reparation. Black's Law Dictionary defines reparation as payment to victims for injuries or damages, or to redress, to remedy, or set right a wrongdoing. Judges, it is an undeniable fact that slavery was an absolutely dreadful and deeply painful part of human history. In fact, slavery can be considered to be the world's greatest tragedy. And yes, we recognize the hurt that this horrific experience may have caused. However, logical reasoning must prevail. Opponents, is reparations truly the answer? What purpose exactly will reparations serve? Before proceeding further, it is prudent that we examine the concept of colonialism. According to Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, colonialism is characterized by political domination, exploitation, and economic dependence. Learned judges, reparations are a form of neo-colonialism. We sincerely hope that our opponents are not of the mistaken belief that former colonizers will simply pay reparations, no strings attached. On the contrary, if they do, they will have to dictate the conditions. The payments of reparations will therefore provide donor countries with new opportunities to exert influence over policy areas within the recipient countries, the epitome of colonialism for which, ironically, reparations are supposed to atone. Judges, we further contend that there is no conceivable way by which a payment of reparations can be feasibly and justly executed. Statistics obtained from the United Nations 2016 estimates that over 1.8 million slaves lost their lives during the Middle Passage. What amount, what degree, what extent of reparations in cash or kind can equate for even one slave's life? Sociologist Claude Douglas asserts that no form of reparation can ever compensate. Opponents, what equation would be used to determine what should be fair payment per life? How much money or what development program can equate at least one human life? Judges, we contend that the value of human life, the value of freedom, far supersedes any form of reparation. Such reparations will not only be inadequate, but blatant disrespect to the memory of our ancestors. And what persons and what process will be used to identify how and to whom reparations should be paid? Let us examine the Caribbean community, a region marked by colonialism. Professor of Political Science at the University of the West Indies, Dr. Wendy Grenade, posits that the Caribbean is a melting pot of races. Guyana and Trinidad exemplify this assertion. And so, given their multicultural structure, what measurement will be used to ascertain who should be paid? Judges, most colonial powers are not prepared to pay reparation of any sort, even in the face of several international laws and conventions, including Article 8 of the Universal Human Rights Declaration. Why is it that, despite the submission of a 10-point plan by the CARICOM Reparation Commission since 2013, no effort has been made? Why is it that, despite the 2016 recommendation made by the UN Working Group of Experts on African Descent, no effort has been made? Should we then clamor for reparations that we know will not be genuinely rendered? Judges, any reparation not sincerely given is one that we should and can do without. Acceptance of such goes against the very pride and dignity that our ancestors suffered and fought for. Judges, we strongly denounce the atrocities that emanated from slavery, but our lives and the progress of our nations must never be based on the payment of reparations. Real healing comes from within, not from the coffers of any colonial power. Let us find the strength within ourselves to improve ourselves and each other. What we need is determination and not reparation.
The second speaker for the proposition.
With protocol already established, good afternoon. We start with the definitions outlined by my first speaker. According to Minister of Culture, gender, entertainment, and sports in Jamaica, Olivia Grange, and I quote, "We must pursue reparations. The great wrong must be set right." To those who would say slavery was a long time ago and we should simply move on, I point to them the debilitating impact of slavery even today. More than 300 years of oppression and brutality has left lasting scars, end of quote. In September 2013, CARICOM announced that they are attempting to sue 11 European nations for slavery reparations. Reparations were given as a result of other liberation movements such as the anti-imperialists and pan-Africanists. So why then do we have to struggle so hard for reparations for this horrific act against humanity? Honorable Chair, steps towards reparations have already begun, so all we are simply saying is, let it continue. Glasgow University released a report after recognizing its historical link between the university and slavery. The present day of approximately £200 million from the transatlantic trade was pumped into the university by slave owners. Having recognized this, Sir Geoff Palmer, Scotland's first black professor, embarked upon the university's launch on the reparative justice program, which, according to the report, provided a center for the study of slavery and a memorial in the name of the enslaved. They have also been working to make ties with the universities of the West Indies. Professor Simon Newman, the University of Glasgow report's co-author said, and I quote, "I am delighted that we have acknowledged our past, albeit indirect, ties to racial slavery, and been inspired to develop new and exciting opportunities and collaborations for students and academics alike as part of a rolling program of reparative justice." End of quote. If this university could see the need to provide reparations without having a direct connection to slavery, why then can the actual participants in the buying and selling of slaves be held accountable? Audience. The laws were created to oppress our freedom of choice and religion because they felt it was inaccurate and only Catholicism was the legitimate way of life. Slaves were banned from practicing their religion and were forced to meet at night. Laws were also enlisted about changing our names because they could not pronounce it. If you are familiar with the movie Roots, I am sure you remember the scene where Kunta Kinte refused to refer himself as Toby as he was brutally beaten as a result. Our freedom of expression, customs, and celebrations were robbed from us. As my first speaker said, we are still struggling because of what the colonizers did. As Grenadian singer Akeem Abraham said in his song Olden Days, "A whole heap of beg and borrow and lend and still want to call us independent." I thank you.
The second speaker for the opposition.
Good afternoon, all. I further challenge our opponent's definition of reparation and reinforce our own. Judges, let us suppose that reparation were indeed paid by the former colonial powers. What then? Would the former colonial powers and slave colonies be on even footing? Would our nation be endowed with great wealth? Would the crimes and the racism against black minorities be a thing of the past? Would we as a people feel justified? Think about it. And what guarantee do we have that reparations will be used for its designated purposes? According to Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index 2016, former slave colonies such as Sudan, Somalia, Chad, Trinidad, and Guyana were all ranked at the bottom. Transparency International further states in these countries, and I quote, "Basic services have been undermined by the misappropriation of funds," end of quote. This view is also shared by Jay Boer in an article entitled Reparations, a Hidden Agenda, who states that no responsible discussion about reparation can avoid the problem of corruption. Former head of UWI Open Campus Grenada and historian Dr. Curtis Jacob concurs. He explains that some Caribbean and African societies are so riddled in corruption that there is a strong likelihood of mismanagement of programs and monies unaccounted for. Judges, in light of all this, is there any assurance that the reparation which is sought will be appropriately used? Tell me, what will result when these former colonial powers, who have not yet accepted responsibility to pay reparations, are forced to pay? Kay in 2003 points out that this can have severe repercussions regarding the provision of developmental and technical aid. He argues that the former colonial powers will most likely curtail and ultimately withdraw developmental aid to former slave colonies as a reactive measure. This, we submit, can not only have a debilitating impact on our economies, but can also hinder political and international relations. Opponents, tell me, at a time when we are calling for an all-hands-on-deck approach to foster global economy, can we afford to embark upon a venture that is tantamount to cause further divide? Judges, statistics from the United Kingdom Demographics Profile 2018 shows that whereas white accounts for 87.2% of the population, blacks stand at 3%. Any form of reparations, be it cash or programs, will have to be financed by taxpayers, including the very blacks who live and work there. Attorney at law Mr. Ruggles Ferguson states that this will result in the taxation of the very same persons who have been affected by slavery themselves. How will this affect the economic development of the small community of the black ethnic grouping, its potential negative effect on remittances to the Caribbean and Africa? Judges, there are three main things that slavery took away from our ancestors: their freedom, their dignity, their lives. And now I ask you opponents, can any form of reparations ever give these back? My friends, we can rise without reparations from any colonial power. Let us harness our strengths, maximize our resources. Let us unite and build each other, not depend on any colonial power. I thank you.
The opposition cross-examiner.
What legal grounds do you have for the payment of reparations?
Opponents, we're not talking about money. You say we're making for payments. Are you aware that there are other forms of reparations?
My opponent, the moot is be it resolved that former colonial powers pay reparations to the former slave colonies. So therefore I asked you, what legal grounds do you have for the payment of reparations? I do agree that there are many forms of reparations.
Opponents, there are not payments cannot only
My opponent, the question was, what are the legal grounds? The key word is legal. Can you answer my question, please?
No, I cannot,
kindly?
opponents. Moving on.
I'm asking the questions. Answer my question.
I cannot answer it, opponents.
Okay, thank you. Moving on. Africans were enslaved by other Africans long before the arrival of the Europeans. In the interest of the justice/fairness of which you speak, are Africans to pay reparations to themselves?
Opponents, might I clarify that the moot states pay reparations by colonial powers, not the Africans. The moot states it is for colonial powers, not Africans.
My opponent, you didn't have to raise your voice. And in this case, the two key words are pay reparations.
By colonial powers.
So if Africans were enslaved in Africa, do they have to pay reparations to themselves?
No, not opponent, because it's for colonial powers, not Africans.
Moving on, my opponent. What is the formula that you would use to determine the payment of reparations?
My opponent, we are not asking for money. There are other forms of reparations, such as free education, cancel of debts.
My opponent, there are different countries, right? Different slave colonies. How would you weigh out who gets what if they're different? Because Jamaica might have more slaves than Grenada. So how would you say, well, Jamaica would get this and I would get this? How would you determine that?
Opponents, the reparations could go equally among the other developing nations.
How can you say that when there were not equal amounts of slaves in every country? Every island? Next question. Your second speaker stated that we are still struggling from what our colonizers did. How so? And what was your source?
Opponents, the struggles today can be seen in the form of the developing nations. The Europeans came to our countries, stole our valuable resources and used them for their own personal gain. It's also seen in the form of...
So what is your source? Where did you get your information?
TheGuardian.com, the Webster.
Can you repeat what you just said?
The Guardian.
The
Guardian.
Okay. And?
The proposition cross-examiner.
Opponents, isn't Grenada, along with other countries, considered a developing country?
Yes, my opponent.
So wouldn't reparations for the damages caused by Europeans not help build these countries' economies?
My opponent, according to my first speaker's definition of reparation, is to make right a wrong done. What you are speaking of cannot make right the wrong done.
Opponent, you have not answered my question.
Yes, I did.
Opponent, you did not answer my question. I asked,
Yes, I did.
would these reparations not help build the country's economy?
My opponent and I said that based on my first speaker's definition of the word reparation is to make right a wrong done. What you are speaking of cannot make right a wrong done. That is my answer.
Worthy opponents, can you explain why we are still a developing nation after we have been freed?
Can you repeat and speak louder?
Can you explain why we are still a developing nation after we have been freed?
Can you repeat again?
My opponent, can you explain why we are still a developing nation after we have been freed?
What is study development?
Opponent, if you cannot answer my question,
I cannot hear what you're saying.
Moving on.
Okay.
Opponents, if steps toward reparations have already begun, then why not let it continue?
Can you speak louder?
Opponent, if steps toward reparations have already begun, then why not let it continue?
Where's your source of these steps being begun?
Opponent, as my second speaker stated, Glasgow University of Scotland has already started the pay reparations for their actions.
But was it successful?
It has been. It's a step towards reparations.
And where's your source of it being successful?
Moving on.
Okay.
Opponent, your first speaker stated that colonial powers are not about to make any payments of reparations. Are you saying that they cannot even make a formal apology, saying that Britain bluntly refused to?
My opponent, again, according to my first speaker's definition of the word reparation, is to make right a wrong done. An apology cannot do that. And the persons who deserve an apology are not here.
Opponent, your first speaker talked about monies. Were you aware that there are other matters of reparations?
Yes, I'm very much aware.
Good. Well, your second speaker talked about forcing colonial powers to make reparations. Let me clarify that we are not forcing anyone to make reparations. We are simply asking them to take responsibility for their actions against humanity.
My opponent, again, according to the definition of reparation, is to make right a wrong done. What? Reparations cannot make right a wrong done? How can you go back to the past and say, well, we'll take back the wounds, take back the beating, take out people from the sea that they felt, that they threw themselves over?
The opposition rebuttal speaker.
Good afternoon, all. Our opponents have made some erroneous statements which cannot be left to stand. The proposition proposes that yes, reparations should be paid. From who and what amount? You somehow seem to forget that the colonial powers have to be taxed, and they are the descendants of the Windrush generation and also the descendants of the white abolitionists. The second speaker stated that slavery was a time of brutality, and now as descendants we struggle. But what they fail to realize is that money, programs, services, or as according to your first speaker, something nice, none can free us from this struggle. They also stated that particular persons who enslaved the West Africans have to pay reparations. However, they fail to realize that these people are dead. Judges, the argument that my opponents have brought forth is attractive, but impractical when broken down in detail. Judges, the plain and simple truth is that reparations, by its very nature, is an impractical and insufficient proposal to amend the wrongs of slavery. Reparation in this case is not the solution. I thank you.
The proposition rebuttal speaker.
With protocol already established, good afternoon. As a rebuttal speaker, allow me to clarify some misleading points made by my opponents. Opponents, your first speaker spoke to money being paid as reparation, but we're not speaking about money. According to my first speaker, the definition for reparation being something good that you do to help improve a bad situation that you have created. So my dear opponents, we can use free education as reparation. As my second speaker stated, Glasgow University released a report after recognizing its historical link between the university and slavery. My dear opponents, your second speaker spoke about freedom, identity, and life. But let me clear up that statement. According to Hilary Beckles, page 2013, page 20, states, colonial laws approved by British government for colonies were clear that blacks were not humans, but were seen as property first and foremost. So my dear opponents, I would like to leave you on this note. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. It is time we stop letting persons control our minds into making us believe we are not wronged. Former colonial powers should pay reparation. I thank you.
And the winner is the Anglican High. Thank you for joining us. Tune in again for Season 11 of the Grenlec Debates. Visit us on Facebook to vote for your favorite debater.
The Grenlec Debates. Powering bright ideas. Vote for your favorite debater on our Facebook page. The Grenlec Debates. Powering bright ideas.